Shadow of the Erdtree came out with stunning reviews and record-breaking number of awards. Its peak seemed to be the sentiment of anyone who played it early, and frankly speaking, I loved it too. Although after finishing it, my feelings are a lot more mixed now. A lot of issues seen in the base game are still present in the DLC, and the questionable trajectory that the FromSoft team is taking with their games seems more apparent than ever. Yet, at the same time, I would be lying if I said that this DLC wasn't the best gaming experience I've had this year. So then, which is it? Is Shadow of the Erdtree actually peak? Yeah, probably, but it's a jagged one. Alright, jokes aside, let's start with what the game does well. Or actually, the DLC. I still cannot believe that it's not a standalone game, because it certainly is the size of one. After Miyazaki's claims about it being the size of Limgrave, the words of this man cannot be trusted. But the worlds he creates, that is undoubtedly the area that saw the biggest leap in quality in this DLC, the world exploration. The new locations are all very separated, yet interconnected in a maze-like way. It's not easy to find paths to many of the regions you see due to verticality, but they are there, and you have to keep track of the places you've yet to explore and keep an eye out for some obscure connections to seemingly unreachable areas. If that sounds familiar, that's because it is. That's how legacy dungeons are structured, and in this DLC, the entire open world feels like one giant legacy dungeon. In that way, it's a lot more true to the title of Open World Dark Souls than the base game itself, which, while also had some of that less obvious interconnectedness, still mainly focused on other ways to surprise the player. It's a huge praise that the DLC surpasses its foundation in its open world, because let's not forget how fantastic it felt in Elden Ring to begin with. In that regard, Shadow of the Erdtree exceeded all of my expectations, and I cannot stress enough how much this new level design adds to the experience. Sure, you still end up going around the edge, though this time instead of mainly finding repetitive dungeons, you're finding paths to whole other areas. Funnily enough, same can be said about the traditional legacy dungeons as well, in particular the Shadow Keep. That place alone houses not only plenty of secrets, 3 bosses of its own, statue requisitioned by Zaki himself that is very important for lore reasons, but also passages to multiple other optional bosses and even whole-ass other secret areas, one of which comes with its own legacy dungeon and a remembrance boss. There's a lot to find here, and mapping the area in my mind as I was exploring it was a blast. I just wished the side entrance had a bit more going for it, as the whole gimmick with draining the water felt almost unnecessary. Don't get me wrong, I love water tricks like any other guy, even if it's not the first time they're doing it. But I was expecting the idea to be a bit more developed by now. The fact that you don't have to go out of your way to drain water, and instead the lever is just waiting for you at the end of the main path, from where you can simply drop down right after using it, makes it practically irrelevant whether there was water to begin with. Some optional paths that would only be available before the drainage could certainly help with that, like some floating planks or boats that allow you to reach a few other rooftops. This might be nitpicky at this point, and overall, these legacy areas didn't disappoint. In terms of ordinary dungeons, I have good news as well. You probably won't be finding them as repetitive in the DLC as they were in the base game. Largely because you won't be finding many of them, period. I was of the opinion that Elden Ring would benefit even from the simple removal of some caves, catacombs, or even bosses, as the repetitiveness kept them from feeling special. I think most people would agree with this, and it seems so did FromSoft, because in total there are only 11 dungeons in the Land of Shadow, and I find them a lot more interesting than an average base game dungeon as well. Instead of introducing some concept and calling it a day, a catacomb here will introduce it, expand on it, introduce another one, potentially even one more if you didn't encounter it elsewhere, and then test you by throwing it all at you at once. On top of caves and catacombs, the DLC also introduced new dungeon types, jails and ruined forges, and their new setting greatly helps with the variety. All in all, this is a huge improvement from the base game's attempts to imitate Skyrim with all of its caves, and for once I was genuinely excited whenever I found some random entrance in the cliff. And another reason for that was that I was finally looking forward to the rewards. Sure, you'll still be getting plenty of items you'll never use, but now the chance of finding a fun new weapon or a useful talisman are a lot higher. The DLC introduces 8 new weapon types, and they're not just new in the name of their category. They all have very different movesets from what we've seen in the base game, generally giving the player more mobility, attack speed, and utility. All of which are very welcome and possibly even overdue. But those are not the only weapons that got special treatment. We got plenty of weapons of all types with some cool new tweaks in the behavior. Generally, weapons within the same category had identical movesets with just a few exceptions. But here we have an extra AoE effect on the guard counter, throwable hammers and exploding spears on charged attacks, all with no FP cost. And the fact that you're probably gonna have a fairly leveled character by the time you're in the DLC means that you're more likely to meet weapon stat requirements out of the gate, and the abundance of upgrade materials of all levels makes it easier than ever to test out plenty of these new weapons. I love this, because it always felt like a shame to me that you're given hundreds of tools in the base game, and yet you only get to fully level just a couple of them. But I do have a concern with weapon arts. They're flashy and awesome looking, don't get me wrong, but in most cases, if the boss as much as touches you, your attack gets interrupted. And since most of them take so long to get started, it's very unlikely that you will be using them in any challenging encounters. The base game itself received quite a bit of criticism that while bosses got a lot faster and now had much lengthier combos in Elden Ring than in any Souls title, the player's toolset wasn't really up to task to handle some of them anymore. Well, it might seem that the DLC at least attempts to address some of these concerns by really letting the players go all out as well. It really amazes me how many different new playstyles were introduced here. It's as if the game is saying, ah well, you're in the endgame anyway, here are some cool new shiny toys to play with. It would almost feel like a power fantasy, if only I didn't get my ass kicked by some of those bosses for hours. Yeah, I've got a lot to say about the difficulty in this DLC, but before we get to it, let's take a look at the rest of the issues that the base game had and compare how Shadow of the Erdtree handles them. This is subjective of course, but for me, the biggest problems with Elden Ring have been with balancing, replayability, side quests, story, and repeat content. The latter we've already covered, and I think the DLC tackles repetition much better. Granted, this is probably the simplest problem to resolve from the list. And while I admit that I would still prefer to have more unique points of interest, especially in almost empty areas like Finger Ruins and the Abyssal Woods, I also understand that the DLC is large enough as it is. And as for these places, well, they're meant to be barren, and that certainly gives them a unique feel and character. Ruins are meant to surprise with their size and feel alien, and the Abyss should be terrifying. We're meant to be almost lost there without a map or a horse, so it's understandable why it can't be just a linear path or a much smaller area. But still, I think at least some of those hills should be out of our reach, so that the full exploration of the place didn't drag on as much. On a blind playthrough, you don't really know if there's going to be an important item hidden somewhere in a random corner, and of course there is, it's FromSoft we're talking about. But a thorough exploration takes so long that it becomes tedious and really worsens the first impression of the area you might have had. This and a few other small things make me feel like the DLC was almost rushed. It critically lacks cutscenes. There are only a handful of them throughout the expansion, and some bosses not having any and lacking dialogue during the fight just feels bizarre. Even starting from how we got into the DLC, just plopped right in there without any transition or acknowledgement. Same with the teleportation into the final area, despite previously opening a path by beating one of the bosses. Why? This just feels so anticlimactic. What's going on here? As for boss repetition, I didn't really have as much of a problem with it in the DLC as I did in the base game. While we see the return of some of our favorite mascots a few times, at the very least there's nothing as egregious as the reuse of remembrances. Well, kind of. We will get to the blinding controversy of the final encounter, but otherwise the few mini-bosses from the base game seem almost fitting. They remind us that we're still in the lands between, provide us with a bit of a break from the harder fights with something we're already familiar with, and in some cases even being thematically and contextually fitting. In the Shadow Keep, my beloved, I found a room with a statue of Marika in it. It seemed weirdly empty, and the messages on the ground suggesting to use a "Oh Mother" gesture helped me uncover a hidden path behind it. It led into an open space where I was swiftly attacked by 2 tree sentinels. What are these guys doing here, I wondered, and 2 of them? Past them was an empty shaman village. There was nothing here apart from an item near some altar, a golden braid. Its description reads, Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There's no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. The pieces started falling into place for me, and while going back through the village, I found a lone tree incantation, which read, Marika blessed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal. This is where she grew up, as a normal girl, in this tiny village whose inhabitants were persecuted, killed, and even stuffed into jars by the Hornsent. And now there's nothing left, only empty houses. Still, Marika blesses this village, and even leaves guards to protect the place with no one in it. No wonder she wanted revenge. No wonder horns became an ill omen in the lands between. This is the reason for the whole crusade led by her son Mesmer, who seems to know his mother's story too, as he keeps a secret way to the village in his murder castle, and even has an infirmary in the lower levels where there were clear attempts at treating the victims. The context this gives to the story is mind-blowing, and it left me speechless, just sitting there on that hill, processing it all, with Marika's strings lingering in the background. Usually I don't go out of my way to try to piece together all of the item descriptions this game has to offer, and there are more things I don't understand about this world than I do. But this is a very special and impactful moment for me. It expanded on the story of the base game and gave me much needed context. One day, we'll return to our home, bathed in rays of gold. It pains me to say that I cannot praise the story of the DLC in the same way. While some characters' motivations were revealed in most spectacular ways, our own character's motivation remains a mystery, just as it was in the base game. Why are we here? Why are we killing all of these people? And now, why are we following Miquella? I liked the idea of an epic quest with many different companions where you all have a common goal and exchange information at the size of grace where you cross paths. And for what it's worth, an illusion of such quest kept me engaged. But, well, that's not what's actually happening. In the end, our goals clearly didn't align, and we end up murdering each other. But why? What was so important for us, for our character? If it's not the desire to murder everything in sight, then I don't know what it is. The reason we even entered this realm is because this knight urges us to help catch up with Miquella, to help him. Since when did that motivation change so much we're fighting them to death, only to fight Miquella right after? I get it, some dialogues and item descriptions indicate that kindly Miquella might not be as kindly as we thought he was. But since when is that our problem? Why are we here? Just to suffer? Lack of motivation really deflates the final conflict, and as a result, the whole journey suffers. Instead, it's the side stories and the friends we make and kill along the way that take the cake. At the very least, side quests don't require the same character motivation due to them being smaller optional endeavors. Instead, it's the player's persistence that is being tested with them. Or rather, the ability to look stuff up in a guide or, in a best case scenario, in a wiki. FromSoft might be improving their graphics and making larger worlds now, but what didn't change since Kingsfield's games is their approach to quest design. It would be one thing if their quests made you actually pay attention, keep track of any developments, and figure things out on your own. But the unintuitive and in many cases unreasonable prerequisites make them practically impossible to complete by yourself without the help from external tools. You could potentially argue, though I would still disagree, that it was on purpose for more linear Dark Souls games. But in an open world, you cannot be expected to visit every possible location after any action you take, to see if some NPC decided to spawn in there for a brief moment, before vanishing forever and leaving your quest permanently locked from further progression. I'm not saying they should add map markers or journal entries, but at this point I'm also not saying that. I think Lies of P found a perfect middle ground by simply showing a portrait of an NPC in the area if they had some quest developments or new dialogue. It's not too intrusive or handholdy, while still allowing players who are interested in those quests to complete them without relying on anyone else. Shadow of the Erdtree makes no improvements on that front, and the side quests are the same as ever, an outdated design from the past century. And don't get me started on having to reset areas in our day and age. How many times I couldn't continue a quest because I thought I misunderstood it or was missing something, when in reality the game just needed me to reload the area for some things to progress. Not past time, mind you, reload. Sometimes simply sitting at a grace is enough, but sometimes you need to fast travel elsewhere and back, or restart the game. Should I also reboot my PC while I'm at it? Just peak immersion. Lastly, let's touch on the topic of replayability before we delve into the glaring issues of combat. Elden Ring's replayability became a concern as soon as we learned that it's going to be an open world game. After all, that means a lot of optional content that is rarely interesting on subsequent playthroughs. And the problem it was indeed. But another issue turned out to be the golden seeds and sacred tears scattered all over the map. These are upgrades of your healing flask, and something that everyone benefits from, regardless of their build. And what that means is that whenever you decide to begin a new playthrough, it would almost certainly start with you riding all over the world, picking up those items for 20 minutes straight. As for the DLC, its obvious drawback in terms of replayability is that in order to even access it, you need to defeat Radahn and Mohg, both of which aren't exactly early game content. Add to that the Seed and Tear expeditions, and you might reconsider your plans to search for Miquella again. And while there are no further flask upgrades in the DLC, there is another new universal upgrade system that makes you stronger in the Land of Shadow. The Scooby-Doo fragments. There are 50 of them in total, and they make quite a difference, so get ready for yet another long horse trip. Of course, you don't have to get them all at once. You can pretend you don't know where they are on the subsequent playthroughs and collect them as you progress through the areas naturally. And if that's the case for you, great. But for any kind of challenge run, the amount of tedious preparation is quite demoralizing. I wish that those upgrades were instead placed as the rewards for completing dungeons and the like. In the base game that probably wouldn't work, because making it almost obligatory to do most of them would be even worse than what we have. But I feel like the DLC has more varied dungeons, and so being rewarded with fragments for engaging with them seems more appealing to me than simply having to do a mindless marathon. Overall, while the quality of an average point of interest in the DLC might exceed that of the base game, the hassle of preparing a character for it is enough to turn me off. It won't stop me, of course, but I wish there were fewer parts that feel like a chore when you're trying to replay the game. And I want to play more Shadow of the Erdtree, not just because I enjoyed it, which I certainly did, but also because, just like with the base game, some of the fights left me feeling like I was doing something wrong. Like my playstyle is not valid for a certain fight, or on the contrary, the playstyle makes the fight far too easy. Or maybe being too shot by a fairly early boss suggests that I should find more fragments first, only to feel permanently overpowered for some well-hidden later battles. I don't want to say that the game is too easy or too difficult, but maybe I will. It's neither and both of those things at once. And before we continue on this messy subject, I need to preface it by saying that, ironically, difficulty is a very tough concept to talk about in these games. Somehow it's even gotten controversial. So it is important to remember that all players have different skill levels, playstyles, preferences, and responses when faced with a challenge. We might be playing the same game, but we will have very different experiences playing it. That doesn't mean, however, that anyone's opinion in the end is somehow wrong or invalid. It just might stem from a different standpoint due to numerous factors. It's a simple yet vital truth for any civil discussion, and it's even more important to realize that even if something is true to you, it might not be to others. Some people play the game casually, and some are interested in mastering to the point of speedrunning. Some want to experience jolly cooperation, while others prefer taking on all the enemies in solitude. Some find pleasure in overcoming the challenge by any means necessary, and others in making their playstyle work, despite it having situational disadvantages. All this to say that things are about to get even more subjective, but whether you agree or not, let's at least try to understand each other. So, with that out of the way, if you find the DLC to be too difficult, get good and level your skibidi blessing. This is genuinely the sentiment that I saw throughout the whole internet for the past week. On Reddit, Steam, shitter formerly Twitter, even from the official publisher. Sure, Elden Ring is wildly popular, and I'm certain a lot of casual players booted up the DLC without really knowing what to expect or even reading the tutorial messages, then got their asses whooped and complained about it. Surely this is who you're addressing with these prime suggestions, right? Because of course I would use the damn fragments if I barely deal damage and then get one-shot by another cleverly named boss. Unless this is exactly what I wanted, as then I wouldn't complain to begin with. I'd like to believe that to be the case for most reasonable people. Yeah, some portion of reactions to the DLC must have come from momentary anger. That is to be expected. But the stance that, well, I beat the game just fine, you must be short on Scooby snacks, is undermining the actual valid criticism that people might have to the DLC. And there's a lot of it, and so far I barely scratched the surface. So let's continue then. Difficulty. As I was saying, my power constantly felt a bit off, despite all of my efforts to be on the right Scatman level. It is an inherent problem of the open world games without level scaling, and I've yet to play a game that tackled it just right. But funnily enough, the DLC could have easily avoided it altogether, dodged the entire combo of issues we now have to deal with, and all it had to do was use more fragments. Well, no, ditch them. Contrary to the base game, devs know the approximate level people will be at when they enter the DLC. They will be leveled enough to a point where extra levels aren't gonna make a huge difference anymore, and strong enough to take down Mog and Radahn. So right away that can be taken as a baseline, and the difficulty can slowly climb from there, without getting out of control. And without new progression systems that, once again, leave FromSoft clueless as to how many upgrades players will have in each fight. Apparently, having a progression system was more important than focused and fine-tuned bosses. As per tradition, the responsibility of balancing is once again placed firmly on the player. And as I said in my Armored Core video, it is fine on the repeat playthroughs, but not on the first one. Especially if you do it blind, which FromSoft is apparently encouraging. In words, at the very least, but certainly not in their design. Neither in terms of balance nor quest design, as we've established. Then, on top of that, we have balance problems with items. Weapons, spells, talismans, you name it. I'm very sorry guys, but this one is not negotiable. There are just too many outright broken things in the DLC in both directions. Just take a look at the stick that procs bleed on every other attack, with some luck melting even the final boss. Or the new healing on hit tier for the special flask. The poor thing is outperformed in all and every circumstance by the standard healing one you find with the flask itself, at the very start of the game. At this point I'm convinced that FromSoft is just incapable of balancing their own content, as there's just no other way these things can happen. Maybe they wanted to keep a strong backup weapon as a way for some video game journalists to finish the game, sure. But has anyone at FromSoft even tested the tier? Because its numbers are so off they must have been chosen randomly without any thought. But my biggest issue lies with what I previously looked forward to the most: boss fights. And since for the relevant examples we'll be looking at none other than the final boss, this is your final spoiler warning. We fight Radahn again, the promised escort, and while his moves are different due to him being able to move this time around, some people are disappointed that the final boss is not something entirely new. And here I am, wishing we could have had a rematch with his unburdened horse instead. But alas. The fight is relentless, but exciting. Certain moves are so fast they feel almost unfair, but I accept that I'm just not used to them yet. It's fun. A delayed blood explosion he inherited from poor Mog is an easy attack to avoid, but since the explosion will obstruct his next move, you need to carefully position yourself to be able to see what it is. Huh, interesting, I thought to myself, unknowing of what that play with visibility was foreshadowing. Then you trigger his second phase, and the real fun begins. Miquella finally makes an appearance, and after introducing himself with what should have been an epilepsy warning and a public apology, assumes the stance of Twin Princes. And this is what you're hit with after. On top of the glaring issue with clarity, there's an even bigger problem here. I beat all of the past games since the Demon Souls, and even finished multiple challenge runs. I used to think that I liked the process of being stuck on the boss and learning his moveset. I certainly did with previous games, but some of the Elden Ring's bosses, especially the Blade and now the Consort of Miquella, made me question that hobby. See, Soulsborne games, and Elden Ring as well, have a certain healing item that allows you to recover from the mistakes that you've made during the fight. Its use is not instantaneous, so the process of recovery is not entirely mindless, as you need to pick the right moment and spot to heal up. It's such a simple yet genius design, as it punishes recklessness and panic, all the while being forgiving if you make a few mistakes, but remain cautious in their aftermath. The result of it is that when you see a new attack pattern for the first time, and understandably get hit by them, you're given an opportunity to learn, recover, and even overcome the challenge here and now, as long as you learn the lesson in fewer attempts than the healing charges you have left. This is not how things work when a boss kills you in one hit, or doesn't give you an opportunity to recover. In these cases, the process of learning a response to a pattern becomes much longer, as you need to start all over again every single time. In case with multi-phase battles, you're distanced even further, as the first phases become another barrier you need to deal with before gaining a chance at seeing what killed you previously. And if you won't see it, due to the camera angles or cluttered and hard to see attacks, all you can do is trial and error. Combine these things together, and you've got attacks that leave you no choice but to brute force them, where the opportunity of an attempt might not come for tens of minutes. Reducing bosses' damage and increasing their health to compensate could come a long way, but instead we have moves that crush you in an instant without even being distinguishable in the blinding lights of the AoE. If that sounds good to you, great, but I don't enjoy difficulty that stems from frustration. There are several potential responses to my criticism, so let's go over them quickly. Firstly, use summons. True, this is valid and even a great option for people whose main motivation is to beat the boss. If, however, you're seeking an experience of an exciting back and forth where you've got to figure out any potential openings in boss's moveset, then using summons that can create practically unlimited openings for you is not a great option. It drastically changes the game from a duel to a piñata party, and if that's what you want, awesome, go ahead, nothing wrong with that, as long as you're having fun. But in a similar way, it should also be acceptable for people to not want such a transformation in combat. Not everyone who's avoiding spirits does so as a matter of principle, stubbornness, or for bragging rights. The majority does so because of the preference in the gameplay loop. As strange as it might sound, we like to get hit by a boss, repeatedly, until we learn how to avoid it and even exploit its attempts at hitting us. It's just that the process has to be fair, and oftentimes it doesn't feel like it. Let me give you an example from the early game. For me, and maybe some of you, this was the first enemy with a boss health bar in the DLC. It's Bob. He doesn't have a lot of moves, and they're not difficult to learn. Anyway, in this battle I use a heavy spear that makes Bob flinch on hit, which interrupts his action. As you can see, it just works, until it doesn't. Sometimes he just poises through. Somehow. It's the same attack, he does the same response. 9 times out of 10 he's interrupted, but that 10th time, the picky dentist smacks me instead. Even if it's not often, it means I cannot reliably attack him this way. There will always be a chance that I get punished, and since there is no tell, I cannot prevent it at this point. If my health was a bit lower, then even if the chance for Bob to poise through my attacks was just 1%, that would mean that I'm still risking dying on each of my attacks. And so I would be forced to either retry the battle until I get lucky enough, or I'd have to find an opening where I won't be relying on Bob's lack of poise. This happens often, and it sucks. Another example is the commander Gaius. This time the name is real. If you try to block this guy while staying close, you're not actually playing Elden Ring. It's a roulette instead. Because sometimes you will get hit like there was no shield. I think that's because of the angle of the attack. It comes so much from above that it almost hits from behind, if that makes any sense. But the other attacks he does are also inconsistent, and I don't really have an explanation. Sometimes you get hit, sometimes not. Get good, skill issue. Fire golems are so huge that depending on the terrain, you might not be able to execute a critical strike on them. Lovely, and honestly, throwing pots is not much better. But it's not all bad, and frankly speaking, I was also pleasantly surprised by some of the hitboxes. I had moments where it felt like I should have been hit, but I wasn't. I thought I was getting some pity iframes, but upon closer inspection, it turned out that I was actually ducking a swing after my jump attack here. I'm so not used to this precision on hitboxes that I was certain that something was wrong the entire time, and it felt a bit off. Then we have Bayle, an endgame boss with very high damage. Contrary to Radon, his movesets are well telegraphed, don't one-shot you, and don't lock you into a combo where a single mistake means death. I am baffled that the struggle with camera for larger enemies is still a thing, despite being in a much better state in Sekiro, but ignoring that, this might be my favorite boss of the DLC. The build up to it is just so incredibly epic, and it even has this cool NPC summon that doesn't aggro the boss as much, while providing some help with DPS if you're struggling, without taking away from the experience. Only adding to it with badass dialogue. Literal peak. But in the most other cases where summons might take away from the experience, what is the alternative? Meta. Think Bleed Stick I was talking about earlier, overbuffed Perfume, or the block and poke with max stamina regen. These are unbalanced strategies that perform just way better than any decent build you've got going. They either deal several times more damage in a single hit than you can ever do otherwise, allowing you to kill the boss before it shows most of its big guns, or allows you to just safely ignore them. Either way, the intent is clear, to have to interact with bosses' attacks as little as possible. And I get why. But at this point, the result is not so different from summons after all. If a fight is unfair, players end up finding ways of matching it, and becoming the unfair ones. The scales of balance just shift to the other side, yet the satisfaction of overcoming a challenge is nowhere to be found, at least for me. I spent many hours fighting this guy, and actually had a lot of fun in the process. In the first phase, that is. In the second, not so much. Close to none, really. But I beat him, and could not believe that it was over. Not only the fact that I finally killed the consort, but also that that was it. I couldn't climb the stairs that kept taunting me, couldn't share my triumph with any allies. Credits after finishing the DLC is not From's style, but I still expected something, some closure. I certainly wasn't given one by the boss, so I was seeking it elsewhere. But a short cinematic with Miquella's memory that didn't really tell me anything new is all there was. So, with the help of mods, I respawned the boss, and beat him again. And again. And again. I wanted to find a satisfying way to end it all. I tried it with a pair of heavy weapons at first, then with the meta builds that I've described, parrying him, and even with the summon. Truth is, I wasn't happy with any of those approaches. I still don't think I've learned this boss, and I don't particularly want to anymore. Funnily enough, the most enjoyable experience ended up being the one with the Mimic. Due to the crazy speed of the boss and the sheer size of its AoEs, the experience fighting him 2v1 felt a lot closer to a more balanced duel. Frankly, this revelation is scaring me because its implication is that some of the fights might have been balanced around using a summon. If that is the case, and it's the direction From is taking with their games, then I guess I might have to forget about experiencing memorable fair challenges similar to what got me into the series to begin with. But perhaps that was too dramatic. I don't know, because on the other end of the spectrum was something that actually made me somewhat hopeful. The deflecting heart tier. If you heard anyone else talk about the DLC, it must have been the exact same thing, almost word for word. It's people's favorite item in the DLC, it makes guard counters a viable defensive and offensive option for pretty much all of the weapons, and everyone wishes that it was a permanent game mechanic or an effect of a talisman. And I agree, that's yet another mechanic that Lies of P got just right. My hope is that this tier is FromSoft's experiment to see what people will think of it and its change to gameplay, all to decide whether they should pursue something similar as a base mechanic in their next project, or to look for inspiration elsewhere. Because, really, where do we even go from here? Rannela and Radahn are the two bosses that made me put down my controller and think, wow, what the hell am I even supposed to do here? They felt insurmountable, but the difference between them is that Rannela is a fairly early boss with not so much health, so you can win more easily by sheer numbers if you collect enough fragments and are willing to trade some damage. Not the case with Radahn, for whom you're meant to have pretty much all of them to begin with. But don't get the wrong idea that having all of the fragments will turn you borderline invincible. Defenses have quite the diminishing returns, and so it's very difficult to go much higher than 80%. And even with that, Radahn will be 2-3 shotting you with most attacks. As I said, not my kinda jam, but it is what it is. I had a lot more fun with other bosses, as most of them still felt challenging but within reason. Their designs feel so distinct, making them very interesting and memorable fights. The uniqueness of the Skedutri avatar, the aggression of Commander Gaius, the Orphan of Cosness of the Putrescent Knight, and the music there, man, this is something else. The score in general is just above and beyond for both bosses and the ambient tracks. The Erdtree foreshadows bosses with soon-to-be endless combos and speeds approaching that of sound, if not of light. It's a pattern. Gotta make games harder, and if it gets too hard, criticism can be parried with use fragments or summons and play the pinata game instead. Call me naive or overly optimistic, but somehow I still have this selfish hope that the next game FromSoft makes will not follow this approach, that they will try to focus on what is important and refine the formula rather than beating it to the ground. I see a glimmer of hope in that moment in the Shaman village, in that gameplay-changing flask tier. in the clever interconnectedness of so many areas, in genuinely great design of plenty weapons and enemies. And as with heat comes cold, life with death, so too I hope the shadow of the Erdtree comes with light. Thanks for watching.